Welcome to Ad Hoc, first of its name, King of the Pedants and the English Majors. Yes, that's right, from the introduction you can tell we're going to talk about Game of Thrones. Try to milk a little bit more out of that sweet, sweet, horrible ending. If I'm honest, putting the last line up front, it wasn't terrible. I think as a finale, the last of the Starks wasn't bad in conception. It was just not good in execution. But we're going to get there. So first, let's talk about me itching my nose on camera in a terribly professional way. Let's talk about the good of the episode. As always, the cinematography was fantastic. As always, the music was amazing. And as always, the actors and actresses were probably better than this show deserved. Game of Thrones has really had a very strong cast kind of from Jump Street, and they've really not let us down in this last season. Even when it's clear from interviews and from reactions that they haven't necessarily wanted to be doing the things that their characters are doing, they've done it and they've sold it and they've made us believe. I think that we could not have asked for better actors and actresses in the show, which is really impressive considering that some of them were brought in at a very young age. And you don't know whether or not, your Maisie Williams or your Sophie Turner is going to turn out to be a phenomenal actress. And I didn't just list those two for any other reason besides they came to my mind, and I can't remember Bran's actor's name. But with child actors, Isaac Hempstead Wright, I just pulled it out. With child actors, you don't necessarily know how they're going to turn out, and they got phenomenally lucky, or they were phenomenally good at casting, because they figured out how to get good kids, and kids that would grow into amazing actors in their own right. And I look forward to seeing things that they do in the future, even though I'm afraid Dark Phoenix is going to be terrible. But now let's get to the bad. It wasn't great in execution. A lot of what my thoughts kept coming back to as I was watching it and after I watched it was that it was rushed. That there's not necessarily bad things here conceptually. That any of the choices that they made from, and we're going to get into deep spoilers here, so if you have not seen it and you care, please watch my other videos. There's not a lot of them. It's easy. Things like Daenerys becoming a mad queen. Things like Jon Snow realizing that Dany has to die. Things like the anger of the Unsullied and the Dothraki and the political situations that result. The ending political situation where Tyrion pulls an elected monarchy out of his butt and throws it at Bran. All of those things can work. It's just that in the context of the show, because they decided that they had 73 hours of television and they were going to stick to that more or less, they ended up rushing things together. One of the things that we can see not in this episode but previously is that Daenerys, when Daenerys was ambushed by the Greyjoy fleet, it did not make sense in the context of the episode because we've seen Daenerys flitting around everywhere she wanted to go with no problem. Until one time they don't have scouts or they don't have outriders. An ambush like that, especially with the aerial element that she has, only makes sense if you frame it as being part of a longer series of maneuvers and countermaneuvers. Tease earlier or have Dany realize that they have some sort of anti-dragon ability that they don't, in terms of the scorpions, that they don't know the capabilities of. Have there be some reason why she has to follow that one route. Give them a reason over an episode or two where her scouts are being harassed and killed and not returned, where she is literally flying blind, and getting to that point makes sense. Fighting the war, arguing with Sansa, making the "can I speak to your manager" face, and then immediately flying into the face of a blistering assault of, I guess, magic cannon-fired tank bomb missile ballistas that can pierce through anything at any range makes sense. But you have to frame it within that greater context. The same thing with Daenerys' descent into Mad Queendom. Yes, there are issues with it because you're taking the lead or one of the lead female characters in television at the time, and you're going down a very well-worn, tropey path. And you can do that, but you have to be careful. And because they wanted to rush through and get it done in the time allotted, they weren't careful. Daenerys' descent into Mad Queendom does not seem to me or to many of us like it was a planned thing than something they pulled out of their buttocks. It doesn't seem like she went down a slow path of making crueler and crueler decisions until she's ready to straight up war crimes a city. It seems like she had a bad week where she lost her dragon and she lost her BFF, and so she decided, I don't know, I'm going to roast the better part of 1 million people to make up for it. Again, as part of a longer season where we have more time to dwell on the things that happened, even going back in a longer season 7 and season 8, where the loss of her first dragon is not kind of just gotten over through a night of sexual healing with her nephew. If we're dwelling on her loss, if we're dwelling on how every time she has tried to be merciful and kind, people have risen up against her, because I can speak. If we dwell on the fact that when she was liberating peoples across the narrow sea, they rose up to meet her and greet her as a liberator, and thus establish a reason why she would, or dwell on and make textual the reason why she would think that King's Landing would do so, then we can have more of an investment in her disappointment when they don't. We need to see the weight of the things that have happened to Dany weighing on her much more than we get in the abbreviated seasons 7 and 8. We should not just see her looking gaunt in the bells and have to fill in ourselves a backstory of, oh, well, this has been building the whole time, and she burned the slavers, and she crucified the nobles. Well, yes, but none of that has seemed to drive her to cruelty against people. None of that has seemed to weigh on her. The loss of her first dragon she got over pretty quickly and did not war crimes anyone. Why would we think this would be different? Daenerys' snap into Mad Queendom shouldn't be a snap. It should be a descent. And it should be a descent that we kind of see coming, and that is far more textual than the kind of back-end filling in exposition / fan wank that we've been forced to do to come to the conclusion that Dany was supposed to be mad all along. Look at the reactions the cast and crew had. There are videos floating around. If you are going to sell this for one of the most popular characters on television, one of the most popular characters on television in television history, one of whom inspired people in this country, people in this world, to name their daughters Khaleesi, the actors and actresses should not be flummoxed by the decision their characters are making. They and we should see what's coming. King Bran works if we have a longer discussion of the corrupting influence of power. That's been a lot of subtext over the course of Game of Thrones. It's been something that's been there behind the scenes, but it's not necessarily been something that we've seen talked about a lot, especially in the last couple of seasons. My brother talked about how he binged all 7 seasons leading up to season 8 because he'd basically stopped watching season 2 or 3, and how things, when viewed that much more quickly and that much more condensed, made much more sense to him versus those of us who watched when it came out and had to wait such a long time between seasons. And maybe that's true, but that just means that those of us that are consuming the media in the way that it was intended to be consumed are being left behind, and that is not the definition of good narrative choices. We see how people reaching for the throne are corrupted, but we also see primarily them as they were corrupt before. We hear, at least, that Robert was a noble man during Robert's rebellion, but we don't ever see that. We only see him as the overweight, although who am I to judge, drinking, whoring, having illegitimate children Robert Baratheon that he is before Cersei kills him. Joffrey is a sadistic madman from birth. And maybe it was knowing he would be king, and maybe it was being raised in a household without discipline, but it's equally likely from what we're presented that it's just that he's a monster, because Tommen and Myrcella are not that. And then Cersei, who we have seen be quasi-competent, cunning, willing to go to cutthroat lengths that no one else in the show is, who is already corrupt, who is already influenced by power and power politics. And we can go back and see, yes, Cersei, as a woman in the society, did not have a lot of agency, did not have control over how she was used, and to an extent was molded into what she became. But that also doesn't necessarily explain that she was willing to blow up the Pope and the Pope home, blow up the Sept of the Nine and the man that she had put in control of the faith, and much of the nobility of King's Landing. We see Cersei as being already corrupt. The other people on the throne, you can make an argument for Stannis and say that Stannis was worsened, that the Stannis of Season 2 and Book 2 would not have burned his daughter the way the Stannis did in the season where he burned his daughter. But again, and I think I said this in my reaction to the episode The Bells, and I've certainly said it in discussions with people about it, there is a line between something being subtext and something being non-existent. Stannis is kind of heartless and a pedant. He took the finger bones of someone who saved his life because it was still smuggling. We have seen him do things that we look at and go, well, a really good person would not do that. And it's not tied necessarily to being a Baratheon king or even a Baratheon lord. It's much more tied to being Stannis. When the only characters that we see falling to this idea of wanting the Iron Throne corrupts you were already corrupt themselves, it undermines the idea that it is the want of power that is corrupting these people, and makes it that they were corrupt to begin with. And that's the problem ultimately with Daenerys' turn into a mad Targaryen, is that it does not seem thematically tied enough to wanting that bad boy spiky chair. Rather, it just seems she had a bad week and she decided to fill the hole in her heart with corpses. It's okay to make things textual. One of the things that you see repeated, one of the lines that you hear repeated in sales, in any kind of persuasive speech, in ministry, in storytelling, in life, is that I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you it, and then I'm going to tell you what I just told you. That can lead to it feeling like there are anvils of narrative being dropped on you. TV Tropes specifically calls it anvilicious. But it also makes sure that you're never going to be at this point with some bearded nobody telling you you done wrong in this way. We're never going to be having to fill in the story that we should have been shown. Game of Thrones in the early seasons had the subtlety to look at one another and say, power makes people do terrible things. But the closest we ever got was the things I do for love. And that's not ultimately the theme that they were going for. So that was the bad. Now let's talk briefly about the ugly. So the bad is things that I think were narrative drops. The ugly is things that either go beyond drops or just don't make sense to me. So here the ugly, I'm going to say Bran's nickname. Tyrion nicknames him Bran the Broken. And first off, Tyrion, you should not be giving people crappy nicknames. You know what that's like. Mr. the Imp. If I were, the king, even if I am a quasi all-seeing, not quite human entity that currently identifies itself as Brandon Stark, I would insist on a different nickname. How about Bran the Three-Eyed Raven? How about Bran the All-Seeing? How about Bran the Tyrion, if you call me broken one more time, I'm gonna turn your freaking eyes into spiders. All of those would have been better nicknames. Also, the fact that no one brings up, hey Bran, do you even consider yourself human anymore? Sansa brings up the can't sire a child, which disability rights advocates have rightly pointed out is not necessarily true for people who are para or quadriplegic. But nobody asks, hey Bran, you're not entirely a human thing anymore. Do you think about children? Do you think about humanity? If you were told a giant meteor was going to come wipe us off the face of the planet, would you care? Bran is a weird choice for king, and this goes back to the you need to take more time and lay things out. But the fact that no one who knows him, even though they know he has been not just weird but super freaky for several seasons now, nobody points out that maybe that's not the guy you want as king. It seems a little weird. The next two were kind of related. Where'd the Dothraki go? There was a whole army of them. They were wheeling around. We were about to get a real good mosh pit, get some house music up in here, take some LSD or ecstasy or whatever the kids are doing, and butt-chugging aerosol cans. I don't know. I'm not hip. Where'd they go? Because we never see them again, and they don't like boats. And Grey Worm takes the Unsullied and gets in boats and leaves, and we see Nerya Dothraki. Did they learn that their horses were actually Pegasi and they flew home? Because otherwise, I guess we're supposed to believe they just smoked some of that dank Westerosi kush and are hanging out in the boats. Also, why is it so important? Why is it so important, that's the word in this language, that we appease Grey Worm when he's gonna go away? You might have seen the meme going around. Is he gone? Good. All right, John, you can stay. But no, seriously, appeasing and sticking to the appeasement of the Unsullied/invisible Dothraki, they could be in your house right now, only makes sense if Grey Worm is going to stay and be around. Are they expecting he's going to sail back in 2 years and check? And if they're expecting that, just have the scorpions ready, I guess? It seems like, and again, this could be the compression, it seems like the Unsullied were there to force it so that Bran could become king, rather than being any sign of a lasting consequence. Finally, I buy that Tyrion is smart enough to create an elective monarchy out of thin air, right? Somebody had to. I guess in a world where you don't have necessarily Roman consuls or the Holy Roman Empire to look on as the idea that a monarchy does not have to descend through a family line. It can be chosen when the new one dies. Someone has to create it, but a little more in that would have been good. He can have been studying political theory. He could have had a really interesting conversation with Sam, that kind of conversation we stopped having about season 7 because we only had so many episodes left and we had to get to the end so that the writers can go do Star Wars. It just seems like there was some missed opportunity there for, again, drive home that theme of debating the nature of power. Drive home that theme of, well, maybe people that want it shouldn't have it, and maybe we shouldn't allow princes to be a thing because we've seen how crappy they can be. That's an interesting discussion. That deserved some screen time. And now the weird, which is just book stuff. If you haven't read the books, I don't know, skip this. The writers and George R.R. Martin have both said that they talked about what the ending is and where the story goes. And obviously, since it's not written, we don't know exactly how we get there. But from what we've been told, it's not implausible that this is the broad shape of the ending and that we're going to get some more specifics about what happens in the books. But it's just going to be a more fleshed out version of this. The problem is there's a lot of moving pieces left in the books that will really make it weird to get to this ending. Lady Stoneheart, the resurrected corpse of Catelyn Stark, who is running around making stabby. The Valancourt prophecy, which says that it will be her younger brother that kills Cersei, which was not in the show, and she dies hugging Jaime with Tyrion trying to save her. So how does that change? Do we get, the choking the life out of Cersei that we expected in the books, or is that going to be tossed aside? The young Griff, the fact that in addition to Jon being a legitimate Targaryen, R plus L equals J is canon. That's the knowledge that got the writers of the show the right to do it when they showed George R.R. Martin that they were hip enough to know R plus L equals J. There is someone who is being positioned as being a true-born male Targaryen heir and isn't, right? The young Griff, who is being proclaimed as Aegon Targaryen, but is not, as far as we know, is a huge complication and could actually be an interesting thing that makes Daenerys more wary of Jon's claim to be Aegon Targaryen because she's been through this crap before. But there's a lot in the books that there's a lot of stuff that are still going on in the books that were never in the TV show. And then on the other side, there is no Night King in the books. So how does that end when Arya doesn't have someone that she can running leap stab and end the fight, right? How does the Battle of Winterfell play out differently? While I'm disappointed, and there are, in the ending of the show, and there are definitely choices I would have made differently, there's enough going on still in the books that I'm going to read them because I'm curious how all the moving parts fit together, and if they do fit together versus the ending of the show, which kind of felt like, an elementary school project you start the night before and turn in mostly covered in glue and tape and hope and prayers and say to your teacher, come on, you just got to give me a C, man, because you're a very mature elementary school student, I guess. Like I said up top, there's a lot in this finale that I didn't like, but only because it felt like they didn't give enough thought. Magical disappearing armies, the Unsullied going, we out! The mountains, King's Landing used to be near mountains, and then for the finale was not near mountains or hills or whatever you want to call them. Land features. Winter managed to last about 3 weeks, it seemed. But what makes it most frustrating is that it could have been done better. It could have been done more meaningfully, more sincerely, more emotionally, more completely. And ultimately, that's what feels the most left out to me, is that we had 6 seasons of a great show and 2 seasons of a kind of mediocre, rushed one. But that's just my opinion. Feel free to put your opinions in the comments below, as once again, I remember to do the most basic thing on YouTube and ask you to like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, even though I've never known bells to mean surrender. This has been Ad Hoc. Pepsi, because I really want to burp a lot during this video. Keep that one. That can be